This is the Fifth Estate Winning Headlines, your media police post. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you might have missed this morning, and we take a look at the political pieces we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 15th of October 2020, and I am TM.
I'm JM.
And I am GK. In case you missed the headlines, here they are. In the Daily Nation, Envoys pile pressure on UHURU RUTO. The Standard, no handshake for you, Raila allies tell RUTO. And in the Star, hardliners in fight to scuttle UHURU truce. A mouthful there. UHURU.
Yeah, RUTO.
The truce. Since they broke up, I don't know how to say the name. Let's start with the Daily Nation.
Yeah.
So it turns out that foreign diplomats are pressuring the president, of all people, and his deputy to tone down their differences, as the two leaders have sort of had opposing views between them.
Yeah.
So the envoys, backed by the United Nations apparently, have prevailed upon these two leaders to cool down the political temperatures in the country ahead of 2022. In a move that they say, interesting, could unlock infrastructure investments worth billions of shillings. So I see
it's a bribe.
A carrot stick approach there. And so the Nation chronicles how there was even tension in the sidelines of the French trip that the president was a part of.
Yes.
And as the Kenyan delegation was negotiating these deals, apparently they were also being prevailed upon to sort of create some sort of forum for a truce. The DP has also been meeting with these diplomats in the last few weeks. We know that on September 24th, he landed his helicopter at Muthaiga Golf Club, and he went to the official residence of the EU ambassador to Kenya. And there he met 19 other European ambassadors, where they even apparently took a selfie. Now, what was interesting here was that apparently no Ministry of Foreign Affairs official or person was admitted into this meeting. It was just the DP and the Wazungus, which is interesting. So we see a situation here, in my mind, where we're being asked to have a second handshake. And for me, I see that there could be greater good for the country here if it means that we're not politicizing every development issue, like we saw with the CRA, like we're seeing with the two-third gender rule. It's creating some form of paralysis, and we have to admit that. Yes. However, RUTO may need a second handshake, in my opinion, because he himself is in a state of fragility. He has more to lose at this point than I think the president does. And so he desperately would need said handshake. I see a situation where he has no political heavyweights on his side, or allies, ethnic allies. And I see a situation where the Hustler Nation may retreat back to their ethnic sort of voting habits. So it's a tricky one to rely on for 2022. So what does the Standard tell us?
Yeah, first of all, I couldn't agree more with you, GK. So the Standard, just like all the other papers today, are on that story that you have just described. But I think the angle that the Standard took was about the reactions from people in the deputy president's camp and in the president's camp, and the reaction to the envoys giving their advisory for a handshake of sorts to take place. Now, the group that is not entirely opposed to it, from my reading of the Standard, is the RUTO group. They are not opposed to it, but they are putting conditions. So a handshake can happen if the deputy president is, I suppose, reinstated as an official deputy president who has things to do and who has a job description, as opposed to, I think, the decorative state that he is in currently right now. However, I do want to say one thing. You know, after saying that the deputy president's allies have refuted, the Standard saying they have refuted claims of reconciliation. It's a bit strange. You know why? Because Onesimus Murkamen had a Freudian slip. And a Freudian slip is when you say something that you mean, but you do not mean to say it. At least out loud, you can say it to yourself. And he said this on Twitter. I'm grateful that the president chose to heed my advice. Now the economy will stabilize through a new super handshake that is to be announced in a few. I don't know if it's in a few days, minutes, or years. And then he said, I wonder where Baba will be left. He went on to gloat and say, I wonder where Baba will be left. But we still love him anyway. Now, this is a revelation. It's a revelation of one thing, that the Hustler camp, as you said, GK, is quite desperate for such an arrangement to be made, for a handshake to take place. And this is evident from Murkomen having a premature enjoyment
boasting
celebration. Celebration on Twitter, boasting that there's about to be a handshake.
A super handshake.
A super handshake coming. Or which I read it as he was saying that salvation is here, but it wasn't.
Interesting. I thought they would have a lot more pride and say, you know what, we want to distance ourselves from Jubilee. We want to show ourselves to be outsiders and get some political mileage in 2022. But alas, let's see. So in the Star.
In the Star, hardliners and fighters scuttle UHURU to truce. I just want to echo your sentiments, ladies. But first, let me give a very short description of what the Star is telling us. They're telling us that vested interests within and outside government are scuttling these frantic efforts by clerics in the international community to reconcile the president and the DP. Let me say two things. Number one, the president and the deputy are not equals. And I'll touch on that shortly. And number two, this hustler dynasty narrative will crumble right before our very eyes in a few weeks. Mark my words. So let me say, the attempts by the diplomatic community and the church at calling the president to order are completely outrageous, completely out of order. Who needs to be called to order is what we should be asking ourselves. And it is not the president, it is not Uhuru Kenyatta, it is squarely William Ruto. You know, it is him. It's extremely presumptuous and patronizing for these two groups to say that they want to reconcile the president and his deputy. You know, who are they? And what locus standi do they have? The president has been very categorical from the beginning, 2018, that all he wanted during this term was to fulfill his development agenda. And he warned his deputy, both in behind quarters and in public, eventually, to cease premature campaigns. But the deputy, as we all know, the Tanga, did not heed his advice. And so the actual story, as you've said, ladies, is this. And as DM, you told us yesterday, Ruto is the one who's begging for reconciliation. In fact, that is how the story should be cast in the headlines. Ruto begs for reconciliation.
Not even asks.
Not asks, he's begging. He's literally groveling, yes, on his knees, and he's asking, please accept me back into the orbit, close to the sun, because right now he's very far from it, and he's staring at oblivion, and he knows it. He's a desperate one who wants to reconcile with the president, because he knows without his blessing, he won't win in 2022. And so I want to, hypothesize that what he does in his office at the hustler's mansion, quote unquote, in Karen, as he's meeting church elders and all these diplomats in Karen, he's quietly begging them on the side to put in a good word.
It's true. We said this yesterday, that he's sending emissaries.
He's sending emissaries. And that's what all these photo ops are about. Those meetings are not to just
they're subliminal messaging.
They're subliminal messages, and the brief he has for all these people is, please, I'm Uhuru Kenyatta. And unfortunately for him, reconciliation is impossible. It's not going to happen. I take that to the bank, Kenyans. It's not going to happen. And if it does, it will be on President Kenyatta's terms. And the president's terms will be simple. He will demand that Ruto should forego his 2022 presidential bid. You cannot, he will not, the president will not and cannot allow Ruto to succeed him. And the trouble for Ruto did not begin the other day. As Professor Mutangweni likes to say, things don't go wrong, they start wrong. And the truth is that this man has undermined the president from day one. He has, as Kalenjins would say, assumed Uhuru Kenyatta from 2013. In fact, even from 2002, this is a man who assumes. And it's going to cost him miserably, and he will see it. So maybe 2032, but not 2022, unfortunately.
Okay.
JK, did you know that the Kalenjin term is assumed? He assumed him.
So we assume we have a three-part criteria. We ask ourselves of these headlines: are they topical or speculative? Are they repetitive or groundbreaking? Are they thoughtful or just plain lazy? I think all have been quite thoughtful and topical. However, I quite like the Standard because it sort of has some playfulness to it.
It sounds very juvenile. He's like,
yep.
Raila is saying, it doesn't belong to you. Handshake for me.
There you go. The Standard gives us our winning headline. On to the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country, where we also have a three-part criteria. We ask ourselves, is it humorous or dry? Is it satirical or pessimistic? And is it effective or just plain lazy? Shall we begin with the Daily Nation? So in the Daily Nation, we have a set of hands here holding sieves. And on one side, we have a Jubilee set of hands at the top and has a very heavy sieve full of people. And as it's going down, sieving, people are dropping, very few people. And on the other side, you're seeing the sieve held by what we assume is Raila Odinga's or ODM sieve. And as he's shaking it and funneling down, there's a last bowl, and the last bowl is called Loyalists. And this one, very few people have made it here. And I guess here we're seeing what's happening so far. People are being sorted. Which group do you belong?
I feel very sorry for incumbents right now, because they must also, it's very hard to foretell the future, to see what is the future going to be like, 2022. As we were saying, a third handshake is it could be in the offing, but I'm telling you it's impossible. It's even improbable, which is even a high certainty that an impossibility. It's improbable.
So they have to hedge their bets.
They're hedging their bets, and this is a really tough time for them.
It is.
I love Iga's commentary on this. So in the Standard, we have a caricature of Wanjiku. And Wanjiku has two devils on either side of her, yelling obscenities, it would seem. One is of Deputy President character with horns on his and a devil's tail. And on the other side, you have a caricature of Raila Odinga. And the little caption there is, the devil you thought you know and the devil you don't know.
And the cartoon is kind of showing how RUTO and Raila are turning to the public to push their agenda, I suppose. But instead of talking to them, from what it looks like in the cartoon, they're shouting at them.
Actually, the one who is shouting Gado is William Ruto. The one who is trying to assuage the country into peace and stability and order is Raila Odinga. And he shouldn't even have horns on his head.
Okay, so I'm very pessimistic. In the Star, what do we have?
And so here we have a cartoon of UHURU and RUTO holding up a frame. And inside it is an archbishop forcing them to shake hands, telling them to think of the bigger picture. It ain't gonna happen. Archbishop Morudi Kwenye.
Oh man, the church has been told to get out of here.
I quite like Iga today. I think that commentary is very apt.
For the moment that we're in, Let's give the Daily Nation our winning cartoon. And now for our final thought, but before we get there, please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel.
And now our final thought. Today we're inspired by the book Zero, the biography of a dangerous idea by Charles Saif. Now this book is a biography, but it's not a usual biography because it's not about somebody, it's about something. Actually a number. And not just any number, but the number 0. So it's a biography of nothing, if we are being clinical about it. So this book, from the surface, looks like a book for nerds, especially people who are very scientifically and numerically inclined, like 2J, who I think recommended this book. But it's also a very good explanation of math and physics, even to the layperson. And it also has some history in there. So the book follows the number 0 from its birth in Babylonia to its struggle for acceptance in Europe, and then to India, where it flourished and where it was exported by Alexander the Great. And finally, it looks like it looks at its culmination or its climax as a very useful number that has helped solve the mystery of some scientific things such as the black hole. So the book talks about the controversies around the number 0 and the controversies in the religious realm, in the academic realm, in the scientific realm, and all those realms of the number 0. And the contestations about whether, one, if it should actually exist, and number 2, if we should have 0, what is its utility? How is it useful to the human race? And one of the demonstrations of 0's utility by the author Saif is in history. He says that in the Gregorian calendar and even in the Julian calendar, which preceded it, there is no year 0. So 1 AD and 1 BC, or 1 BC is followed by 1 AD. And he says that if this were actually replicated in all the other calendars, including the one that we follow, there would be big mistakes in history, or in us as human beings grappling or understanding historical sequencing, historical events and periods, and having or making explanations around that.
Yeah.
So he not only demonstrates the utility of the number 0 in history, but also shows how useful it is in the physical sciences. And I think that's predominantly what he does in this book from chapter 3 or 4 onwards, including solving or at least gaining an understanding of one of the most mysterious things to us human beings, which is the cosmos, that is the universe beyond the earth that we live in and understand to a greater extent. So the number 0 remarkably has gone a long way into solving and understanding these mysterious things that have been beyond our understanding as the human race for a long time. So I would say, from my personal perspective, I don't know if everybody would agree with it, but it's a great read because it packs so much information into a tiny book. It's a relatively small book. It's enjoyable to read, but I would advise that you read it in the morning when your mind is clear, not at the end of a long work day, because it actually is also quite heavy. But it's got great range from history to science, and of course then you get to understand the biography of Zero.
Absolutely, very good insights from this text. Zero has some very useful properties, as you said, and I want to talk about how the concept of zero transformed the visual arts. But before I get there, DM, you may recall also that George Saitoti, the late vice president, apparently did his PhD thesis on the value of zero.
Wow. Oh, did he?
He did. Yeah, it is said that he did. A very abstract thing, but yet a very fundamental thing to our life as we understand it today.
Yeah.
So how did zero transform the visual arts? Before the 15th century, the author tells us, paintings and drawings were largely flat and lifeless. The images in them were distorted and two-dimensional. Gigantic flat knights peered out of tiny misshapen castles, as depicted in this painting of the flat knights and misshapen castles. And even the best artists could not draw a realistic scene. And they didn't know how to use the power of zero. But an Italian architect, Filippo Brunelleschi, made a breakthrough in this regard, and he demonstrated the power of zero by creating a realistic painting by using the concept of a vanishing point. By definition, a point is a zero thanks to the concept of dimension. So Brunelleschi in the year 1425 put together, on his canvas, placed this point, literally a dot, in the center of a drawing of a famous Florentine building known as the Baptistery, as you can see on your screen. And this zero-dimensional object, the vanishing point, is a spot infinitely far away from the viewer. And that is a spot that completely revolutionized visual arts from then on. And as is evident from this painting, you see, as objects recede into the distance, they get closer and closer to the vanishing point, getting more compressed as they get farther away from the viewer, bringing them closer to reality. And so everything sufficiently distant, people, trees, buildings, squashed into a zero-dimensional point, and which eventually disappears. And so the zero in the center of the painting contains what the author says is an infinity of space. And that vanishing point, therefore, transformed what were two-dimensional drawings and paintings into a perfect simulation of reality, of a three-dimensional building and of three-dimensional objects.
Nice.
The vanishing point.
The vanishing point.
Perhaps then you should change your PhD topic to infinity.
Right.
My goodness.
To complement George's
all this stuff is so abstract for me.
So I enjoyed this book, although, like GM said, it was quite heavy. It's not something you just take in quite easily. Yeah. But I liked the idea of taking us back to the basics of zero. And it got me thinking, why on earth did my teacher ever teach me why were they teaching me to multiply by zero? Yeah. Like, it was such a useless sort of exercise, right? And so he chronicles sort of zero's formulation over history, like DM has said. And this stood out to me. You never need to keep track of zero sheep or tally your zero children. Instead, we have, instead of saying we have zero bananas, we say we have no bananas. And you don't have to have a number to express the lack of something.
Yeah.
And it didn't occur to anybody to assign a symbol in the absence of, to the absence of objects. Yeah. And so this is why people went for so long without the number zero. It simply wasn't needed. But as mathematics and physics and things advanced, the number zero became quite crucial. So we know in basic arithmetic, you add a number to itself and it changes. So 1 plus 1 is not 1, it is 2. 2 plus 2 is 4, but 0 and 0 is 0. And this violates a basic principle of numbers, which is called the axiom of Archimedes, which says that if you add something to itself enough times, it will exceed any other number in magnitude. However, 0 simply refuses to get bigger. It also refuses to make any other number bigger. So it's like as if you add 2 to 0, it's as if you had never added a number to it at all.
So stubborn.
So stubborn. And the same with multiplication. When you multiply other numbers, you stretch. That's literally what multiplication is, the act of stretching. But 0 times anything again is 0. But what this does, it led to what is called the distributive property of numbers. So math has 4 rules, and this is one of them. The distributive property of multiplication, for instance, states that multiplying a number by a group of numbers added together is the same as doing each multiplication separately. What this simply means is, if you remember, so it'll flash up on your screen, 3 times brackets 2 plus 4 equals 3 times 2 plus 3 times 4. So the 3 can be distributed across the 2 plus 4 into the 3 times 2 and 3 times 4, and you get the same answer. So another thing that came out was how 0 is infinity's twin. Bear with me. So 0 is powerful because of its infinite nature. They're equal and opposite, yin and yang. They are equally paradoxical and troubling. And the biggest questions in science, religion, are about nothingness and eternity, the void and the infinite, the 0 and the infinity. So you had a challenge for philosophers, especially those who had mathematical leanings, because they, on one hand, saw 0 as a bona fide number, but on the other hand, 0 is linked to the idea of nothingness and non-being. So that created so much conversation and debate from as far back as Aristotle and people. Anyway, as we moved on, mathematicians have gone on to make this connection between 0 and infinity. So you have a situation where in thermodynamics, a 0 becomes an uncrossable barrier. It's the coldest temperature possible. You have things like the Kelvin scale being created, and this is a unit of measurement to include temperature for absolute 0. So the total absence of any heat energy. Then you have Einstein's theory of general relativity, where 0 becomes the black hole. And interestingly here is that scientists have come to agree, perhaps, I don't know, that the cosmos was spawned from nothing and will eventually return from the nothing of which it came from. Interesting there. And in quantum mechanics, we see that 0 is responsible for a bizarre source of energy that is ubiquitous, and it's present in this vacuum. So 0 plays into all of this. It made physics and math much more complicated. But we also have a situation where when you divide by 0, you get an error. It defies logic and mathematical sort of framework
patterns
that we all know.
Yes.
So I'll end with that. If you're interested in math,
people
I
will have to multiply what you would have to rewind what you have said
I know.
multiple times.
The axiom of Archimedes.
A little understanding of the axiom of Archimedes.
Anyway, you can watch it on the weekend. So, on a
Good
day
job.
where we had a winning cartoon from the Daily Nation and a winning headline from the Standard, let's go to poetry. So William Blake once told us, to see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wildflower, to hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. And what Blake was trying to tell us is that you can find universes of meaning and revelation hidden inside the smallest of things.
Beautiful.
So please subscribe to our YouTube channel, but also find us on TV. We're on GoTV, Prime Free to Air, and StarTimes. Have a lovely evening.